Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest craft nerd of them all?
The only thing better than being creative is being creative with wine. I started this project at 1 o'clock, so a wine came with me. So the first step is to cover up the glass. I'll be spray painting this, so I want to make sure that none of that spray paint goes on the glass. I have painter's tape. You could use masking tape though, that'd be perfectly fine. So you can see I'm spray painting this black. This black actually has a slight metallic finish to it. I thought that would look great with the gold, but you could use just a straight black if you prefer. Now, because I'm influenced by Snow White and the Huntsman, I've decided to go with a really gold and black theme. And at the moment, I'm just pulling out any materials that I think may work on the piece. That's usually how I start a project. So then I'm just laying out things in different spots to see what I think will work. I've decided to create a gold and black design with different components that I have found objects and things that I have. So I have a box of found objects there. This piece that I'm putting at the top is an awesome solid brass filigree face. And I'm using E6000 to glue that down because I really want that to stick well. And E6000, it's slow drying, but it is very strong. So I'm using the tape just to keep it in place while that dries. I want the base design to be sort of symmetrical. You may remember these gold pieces that I bought from the supermarket actually, and they have a really shiny gold look to them, and so I'm using those. They're just paper doilies. This is a tacky glue. It's basically a PVA glue though. So I'm measuring to make sure that I do have symmetry in the design. And I just use a little piece of chalk to mark out the spots where I'm going to be putting these doilies. This is the next day, to be honest. I let it dry and again started at 1 o'clock. Now this is some gold lace that I have, and it comes in a strip, so I'm just cutting it out and cleaning up the edges, and I'm using the E6000 again to glue this down. Now I do try and put some medium over the top, a gloss varnish medium, but it didn't work out too well because they are so shiny, these doilies, that it's sort of just beaded on top. So I didn't really bother too much with that. Now I come back in with the spray paint, but very gently. I don't want to cover up the doily gold, I just want to incorporate it into the design more and soften the gold with some black. Now the pieces you see me playing around with here are actually old brass earrings. You could use any sort of brass stampings. I kept the design, again, sort of symmetrical, so I've put those pieces in the center. Now these are paper flowers. Again, this was from a previous haul video I've shared, and I really want to put some roses in there, but of course I don't want them pink. I also have some tubing that's purple at the moment, and I'm going to be spray painting all of this black. Now using this stencil, I've mixed up some of my gesso with the modelling compound that I bought, and I am just scraping that across to create a sort of raised filigree design in a dark grey colour. Could just use paint though. that would be just fine as well. So because the modelling paste is white, I couldn't get it entirely black. So I do end up going over the grey with a slightly darker, sort of dark grey black colour. I'm also putting another filigree sort of border design, as you can see there in the grey. I'm not worried about being too perfect. In fact, you know, I like some imperfection with this. I think of it as, you know, an ancient magical mirror, and so, you know, having some of these aspects look a little bit rough just adds to the character. So these sticks came from my jewellery tree, and I kept them because I thought I might use them for something, and I thought they'd be great for this project. I had some white leaves as well, and I spray paint all of it black. The twigs are already silver, and so I don't entirely cover the silver, but I just put a little bit of black over the top. As I mentioned before, I'm going over the top of that with the black paint. It just crisps up the design and makes it a bit more visible. Now it's a little bit hard to see, but I have these little brass flowers that I'm gluing on there, and now I am using, now the tubing that I've got is tubing that you can buy for beadwork. I'll put a link to some places you can buy this tubing, and it's fantastic for creating vines and things. I've got 3 different thicknesses of the tubing. I am going to be playing around with some other things that could work in the same way though. I think if you had black rope or some other tube, it needs to just be bendable and, you know, come in different thicknesses to create it in a natural looking way. Now, I'm just using tacky glue at this point, and I'm using what's called magic tape. If you haven't heard of magic tape, it's basically just a removable tape, so it's not as sticky as sticky tape and is less likely to damage anything, and it's great just to temporarily hold things in place. So these are going to be vines, and then once I've put all the vine work with this tubing all the way around, I'll end up putting the roses around that as well. And I am interspersing these black leaves as well in different places. I'm being very generous with this glue because I really want to make sure that it's strong. So you'll notice there's quite a bit, and obviously it does dry clear, so you can confidently put this glue wherever you need to. So as I'm putting this design together, I'm thinking about what a natural vine might look like. You know, often vines, they grow in clumps, you know, with a few strands of vine together, or they start curling around one another. So I'm curling this thin piece around the thicker, and that makes it look even more like a real vine. If you're not sure what it might look like, then maybe find some photos of vines, and that can help with inspiration. I'm also not wanting to cover up the entire mirror with vines either, so I don't want it to be too busy and too all over the place. So I create basically a flow of vines around the mirror, and then with the thinner pieces of vine that I add afterwards, so I start with the thick piece and then go to sort of thinner and thinner, I'm not deviating too much from the original vine. Hopefully you can see the different thicknesses of the tubing that I have here. This piece that I'm working with at the moment is the really thin piece that I've curled around in spirals, because as I said, that's sort of how a vine will grow. It'll twirl around itself. As you can see, I'm starting to place the roses. I'm just trying them in different spots, I guess, to where I'm happy with them. Sometimes I'm using them as a way to cover junctures in the vines that, you know, may look a little bit messy or something. Otherwise, I'm just trying to sort of distribute them not too evenly, because in nature things are not going to be perfectly spread out, but but relatively, so that there's not just one area of the mirror with a whole lot of roses. So this part where I am putting the roses on, I have let some of the glue dry for a while, and I am able to take off some of that tape. So that's what I would recommend, is waiting till your vines really have dried at least strong enough that you can remove some of the tape. Otherwise, you might pull that tape off to put a rose down and your vines move because they're just not stuck down. Now there's a ridge around the edge of this mirror, and I thought that would be the perfect spot for these twigs. I'm breaking them down so that they really only stick out slightly. And I really do keep the stick strictly in this ridge along the edge because I don't want it to take away from the vines or the roses. And being that they are silver, they have enough contrast to the rest of the mirror that that I can put that element in without taking away from the rest of the design. Alright, so once it's all dry, I'm now wanting to put some gold over the top. I'm using a dry brush method, so that means putting a very, very small amount of paint on your brush. It's also good not to have quite a rough brush in this situation, and just to sort of skim over the top of the things that you're painting. You don't want that paint to go into the crevices, because it is that contrast that makes it look really metallic. you can see the vines are really showing up now that I'm putting that dry brushing over the top. I painted the butterflies gold. These are just little chipboard butterflies that I had in my stash. Now, one of my projects is really not complete unless there is some sort of bling. So I have some gold seed beads, permafinish galvanized gold that I have in my stash, and just some little plastic rhinestones that I use for packaging and things, which are a really nice dark grey black colour. And I also have little gold micro beads. You can really use anything you like, but basically I'm just wanting to put these black and gold beads into little crevices, sometimes into spots where there's excess glue and I'm sort of covering up the glue, or just basically accents all the way along. So I'm not putting them everywhere, just every so often a little cluster of jewels. See, I'm just using one of the little sticks to help move the jewels around where I want them. It can just be a little bit easier to get them in the little crevices. Now I have these little brass flowers I think I mentioned earlier, and there's a little spot in the center, so I decided to put a little black crystal in the middle. So now it's time to take the tape off. There was a little bit of paint that managed to get through, so just use a little bit of mineral terps on a rag and wipe that off. And then you're done.